Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Mountain of the Dead, The Dyatlov Pass Incident, by Keith Mccloskey. Narrated by Curt Bonnem. Publisher's note. In this audio edition, you will hear references to figures, charts, and tables present in the print and ebook formats of this book. Forward. In February 2013, it was 54 years since the Dyatlov tragedy, which took place in the northern Ural Mountains. In what appears to be coming to prominence as the Russian equivalent of the Mary Celeste mystery, numerous theories have been put forward to try and explain what happened. But it appears to be a case that almost defies rational explanation. These theories, which try to explain what happened on the night of 1-2 February 1959, range from the quite plausible to what some may think of as the absolutely ridiculous. I have included them all, at least the known theories at the time of writing, including one that surfaced while I was well into the preparation of the book. It is important to keep an open mind, and it is also worth considering that the cause of the deaths may involve more than one theory, or a combination of theories. The core of the mystery is not so much how the various members of the party died, but what caused them to flee from the safety of their tent in what appears to have been blind panic, fearing for their lives. There is also another line of thinking which suggests that the deaths occurred elsewhere and their bodies were deposited on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, Mountain of the Dead. The real problem is that there is very little evidence to go on. Everything is conjecture. Also, part of the problem in finding an answer is the nature of the former Soviet Union, with its mania for secrecy and security. Despite the fall of the former USSR, the opening up of archives, and a different outlook among the younger generation, old attitudes still persist in many areas of officialdom. I have also tried to give an idea of the background in which the tragedy took place. In other words, the Cold War, which dominated everyone's lives in the East and West at that time. I have also given a brief explanation of the part that ski tourism played in the Soviet Union. The only thing certain is that 9 young people in the prime of their lives died dreadful deaths, and, like the Mary Celeste, it is probable that the truth of what actually happened will never be known for sure. Prologue. In January 1959, 10 students from Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk set out on what they hoped would be an exciting journey and a test of their skills in the remote northern Ural Mountains, nearly 400 miles north of the city where they lived and studied. Although it was midwinter and the conditions would be harsh, the trip was to be a break from the hard daily routine of their studies. The leader of the group was Igor Dyatlov, who had only just turned 23, an affable and highly experienced skier, hiker, and orienteer. There were 2 strong-willed girls in the group, Ludmila Dubinina and Zinaida Kolmogorova. There were also another 7 males, Yuri Yudin, Rustem Slobodin, Semyon Zolotarev, a tough Second World War veteran and expert in unarmed combat, Alexander Kolevatov, George Krivonishenko, Yuri Doroshenko, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, who was born in one of Stalin's gulags, where his father, a French communist, had been imprisoned and executed. The whole group were all very fit, experienced hikers and skiers. Only the previous year, Igor Dyatlov had led a party on the same route, so they were confident that there would be no problems encountered that they could not deal with. They left Sverdlovsk and traveled north by train, lorry, and then finally on foot and skis. On 27 January, they reached an abandoned village of wooden houses, which had previously been used by geologists. They spent the night there, and it was here on the following day, 28 January, that one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, decided to turn back because of illness. Their target was to reach the 1,234-meter Mount Otorten, translated as "Don't Go There" in the local Mansi language, but they ended up on the slopes of the 1,079-meter mountain named Kholat Syakhl, translated as Mountain of the Dead in the local Mansi language. Up until 28 January 1959, everything can be independently verified about the journey of the Dyatlov group. Beyond that date, and despite the presence of a group diary and photographs, nothing can be verified. 1. Journey to the Mountain of the Dead. The events leading up to and the night of 1-2 February 1959 have been reconstructed, as far as possible, from what was found by the search parties and the last entry in the Dyatlov group's diary for 31 January 1959, which was made by Igor Dyatlov. This chapter is also a reconstruction of what happened from the official point of view. On 23 January 1959, the group of 10 skiers spent the day in room 531 at Ural Polytechnic Institute, or UPI, in Sverdlovsk. They were all members of the UPI Sports Club, and were frantically packing their rucksacks and getting their equipment ready as they had a train to catch. Assisted by the Zavchos, the university's head of provision distribution, they packed items including oatmeal, 3 kilograms of salt, knives, felt boots, and all the other accessories necessary for the journey. The talk was on a very superficial level, and despite their anticipation of a journey they were all looking forward to, tempers were starting to fray. Zina Kolmogorova expressed her frustration at not being able to pack a spring balance. Rustem Slobodin asked whether or not he would be able to play his mandolin on the train, to which Zina sharply replied, "Of course." They considered the mandolin to be one of the most important pieces of equipment for the journey, as it would be their main source of entertainment. Luda Dubinina counted the money they had pulled together. Money was tight. They had been given 1,000 rubles by the trade union committee at the university, but they had to put in their own money as well. They were in high spirits and looking forward to their expedition, despite the last-minute rush to ensure everything was packed and that they had not forgotten any food or equipment. That day, 23 January, was the first day on which an entry was made in the group's diary, and in which they took turns to make the entries for the period of the expedition. The first entry was made by Zina. She wrote that she wondered what awaited them on the trip, although at that time she could have no inkling of what was to happen. Their planned route was by rail to the town of Ivdel, via Serov, and then a bus would take them directly north to the small settlement at Vizhay on the river Ospia. From Vizhay, the group would proceed on a hired truck, then on foot and skis to Mount Otorten. The whole route from Sverdlovsk to Mount Otorten, with the intermediate stops, was more or less directly north-south and approximately 340 miles, or 550 kilometers as the crow flies. From departure to their arrival back in Sverdlovsk, the trip was expected to take 22 days. At this stage, another person was expected to join the group, Nikolai Popov, nicknamed the Morose Fellow, who had agreed with the group leader Igor Dyatlov to provide his own supplies and equipment. Popov had already graduated from the university and was not a student. Fortunately for him, he missed the train. The group set out by rail from the main railway station in Sverdlovsk for the 201-mile, or 324-kilometer, journey north to the town of Serov. The young men in the group made a solemn promise to the two girls that they would not smoke for the entire trip. Zina doubted very much that they would have the willpower to keep their promise for so long. Once the train set off on the journey north, they settled into their seats and Rustem Slobodin took out his mandolin. Together they sang songs they knew and composed new ones. Semyon Zolotarev was not well known to everyone in the group, but he fitted in quickly, as he had a vast store of songs, many of which the students had never heard before. Because of his much greater experience of life, particularly as a frontline soldier in the Second World War, as well as having been a Komsomol, Soviet youth organization leader, he was duly accorded respect by the others. Much has been speculated about Zolotarev, who, like the story of what happened to the group, in many ways remains an enigma. As they sang along to the mandolin, darkness descended as the train continued its long journey north. They looked out of the window at the seemingly never-ending taiga, which spread to the Ural Mountains on the left, and on the other side to the vast empty spaces of Siberia, as well as the occasional appearance of a small severny, or settlement. They passed several military bases, or areas related to the military between Sverdlovsk and Serov. During the Nazi attack on the USSR in the Great Patriotic War, 1941 to 1945, as the Second World War was known to the Russians, much of the military production, for example tanks and aircraft, was pulled back to the east of the Urals, far away from the Nazi advance and out of the range of Nazi bombers. With the advent of the Cold War, most of these facilities remained where they were, with expansion taking place and the addition of facilities to take account of the new atomic age. There was a major plutonium-producing complex at Kushtym between Sverdlovsk and Chelyabinsk, which lay in the opposite direction, south, to which the Dyatlov group were traveling. The Kushtym plant was where George Krivonishenko had been involved in the cleanup after the 1958 nuclear accident. There were other facilities, more or less on the route north on the group's line of travel. These included a gaseous diffusion production plant for plutonium U-235 at Verkhnevsk to the north of Sverdlovsk, and a large facility for the production and storage of nuclear warheads at Nizhnya Tura. Travel in these areas was severely restricted, and the presence of so many nuclear, military, and associated facilities has a bearing on some of the theories relating to what happened to the Dyatlov group. By 3 a.m. on the morning of 24 January, having exhausted their stock of songs and being exhausted themselves, Zina recorded in the diary that the rest of them had all fallen asleep as she surveyed the darkness outside the train window. After leaving Sverdlovsk well behind them, the train pulled into the town of Serov at 7 a.m. on 24 January. Both Zina and Luda mentioned that they had traveled with another group of hikers from the university, led by Yuri Blinov, who had left at the same time as them. Luda had suspected that Zina was keen on a male member of the Blinov group, as she, Zina, appeared upset when the two groups later split up. The two groups were well known to each other, and Igor Dyatlov had given his radio set to the other group. However, upon their arrival at Serov, the reception the station staff gave them caused all feelings of empathy and friendship to disappear, as, despite the early hour, they were not allowed into the station building. In the diary, Zina described somewhat sarcastically the response from the staff as hospitality. A policeman had stared suspiciously at the group, and they must have felt intimidated, as Zina further noted in the diary that they had not broken or violated any law under communism. The atmosphere of intimidation must have begun to annoy George Krivonishenko as he started singing, which was enough for the policeman to grab him and haul him away. The police told the group that Section 3 of local railway regulations forbade all activity that would disturb the peace of passengers. Again, Zina made a diary entry, which stated that Serov must be the only station where songs were forbidden. Eventually, George Krivonishenko was released, and the matter was settled amicably. Whilst it is possible to read something into the behavior of the police towards the group, it is more likely that the group were boisterous and in good spirits in the early stages of their journey, which attracted the attention of provincial officers with too much time on their hands. Furthermore, the group had passed through an area containing sensitive military establishments, and were starting to approach another area around Ivdel that contained numerous prison camps. In these circumstances, and at that time in a state obsessed by security, strangers automatically brought suspicion on themselves by their very presence. Serov was more or less halfway from Sverdlovsk to Ivdel. The group had more than 11 hours to kill before they could take the next train to Ivdel, which left Serov at 6:30 p.m. They were warmly welcomed at a school close to Serov railway station. A janitor, or zavchos, heated water for them and made arrangements so that they could store their equipment. It was a free day for the group, and the diary entry for that day was made by Yuri Yudin. Yudin had wanted to visit a natural history museum or a local factory. Visiting a local factory may seem an odd choice as a way to pass the time, but it was very much in keeping with the ideal of the young communist Yudin, who, although studying at a higher institute of learning, would still wish to express his solidarity with the factory workers and would have been welcomed by them. However, much to Yudin's disappointment, the first part of their day was spent in checking their equipment and going through their drills and training. At 12 p.m., when the first part of the school day was over, the group organized a meeting with the school children. The meeting was held in a small, cramped room where the children listened silently as Zolotarev explained what sports tourism was and what they were doing on their trip. The children were possibly a little apprehensive of Zolotarev, but when Zina started talking, they became more animated. She spoke to them individually, asking their names and where they were from, and was a firm favorite with the children as they asked her endless questions in return. After 2 hours, the children did not want the group to leave. They wanted to know each minute detail about the trip, from how the torches worked to how the tent was set up. Eventually, the time came for the group to gather their equipment and make their way to the station for the train to Ivdel. The whole school went to the station to see them off. The children were upset at the group's departure, with some of them in tears, and many of them asking Zina not to leave and to stay with them. Zina asked the children to make sure they behaved well and studied hard. However, despite the emotional farewell, the group's problems with railway stations and the police had not ended. A young alcoholic accused someone in the group of stealing his wallet, with the result that the police were called. Luckily, nothing came of it, and the group were allowed to proceed without any further restrictions, much to their relief. The journey by train to Ivdel was 5.5 hours long. They settled down to talk. Zina proposed a discussion on the nature of love, and again to sing songs, accompanied by Rustam Slobodin's mandolin. Some members of the group used the time to revise for their exams. Their sustenance on this part of the journey consisted of garlic bread without water. The town of Ivdel was the last major point of contact with civilization before they set out on the journey north into the more remote Siberian taiga and the mountains of the northern Urals. The town itself was the center of the Gulag camp system for the area. At one point, there were almost 100 camps and associated subcamps of varying sizes in the vicinity of Ivdel. The town is situated on the Ivdel River, near the confluence of the Loizva River, 332 miles, or 535 kilometers, north of Sverdlovsk. It had been the first wooden fortress east of the Urals, built in 1589, and became a gold mining settlement in 1831. The first gulag was established there in 1937, and eventually the population grew to between 15,000 and 20,000 inhabitants, a figure which has remained fairly constant. Many prisoners who were released from the nearby camps decided to stay in the town as they had nowhere else to go. The same applied to the prison staff. A number of former staff who had finished working at the camps also decided to settle in Ivdel for the same reason, that they were familiar with the area and had nowhere else to go. The result was that by 1959, a large segment of Ivdel's population was a strange mixture of former guards and the formerly guarded. On arrival just after midnight on the night of 24-25 January, the group alighted at Ivdel railway station. They found a large waiting room, where they stored all their equipment and took turns to keep watch while they awaited the bus for Vichy early the following morning, Sunday, 25 January 1959. A comment made in the group diary by Yuri Yudin is noteworthy, that they had total freedom of action at the station at Ivdel. This was no doubt a reference to their two unfortunate previous encounters with the police at Serov Station. On their arrival at Ivdel, the group were 90 miles, or 145 kilometers, from Mount Otorten. After the short wait, they took a bus to Viger, where they arrived at 2 p.m. They decided to spend the night of 25-26 January in Viger, before proceeding to the next point. Their accommodation was described by George Krivonishenko as a so-called hotel, which must have been very basic, even by the standards of the austere Soviet Union in the 1950s. There were not enough beds for the 10 members of the group, so they slept two to a bed, with both Sasha, Alexander Kolevatov, and Krivoy, George Krivonishenko, gallantly sleeping on the floor. Despite the inadequate accommodation, they slept well and rose at 9 a.m. on 26 January, only to find that the outside temperature was negative 17 degrees Celsius, and a small window had been left open during the night, forcing them to get out of bed in freezing conditions. They relied on the hotel for breakfast and were given goulash and tea. Igor Dyatlov made a comment about the lack of heating in the so-called hotel, joking that if their tea was cold, they could always go outside the hotel and it would soon warm up enough for them to drink it. They then arranged to get to the next point on their journey, the 41st Kvartal. This was a camp for geologists and workers in the area, by road in an open flatbed type of Gaz-63 truck that was organized to take them. A photograph of 8 of the group shows them all sitting on the back of the open truck, with wooden slatted sides exposed to the elements. Yet they were all well wrapped up against the wind and cold and again seemed in good spirits. The truck eventually left Viger at 1:10 p.m. on 26 January. Despite their layers of clothing, the group were freezing on the 3-hour journey and tried to occupy themselves by singing and animatedly discussing various topics, which ranged from love, a favorite topic of Zena's, to the nature of friendship, and the problems of finding a cure for cancer. The bitter cold on the truck affected Yuri Yudin badly, and despite trying to hide under a makeshift tent they had made to keep off the wind, he developed a chill, with lumbago and an acute pain in the leg. At the 41st Kvartal, they were glad to be able to get off the truck. Even though it was a remote area, there was a hostel there, which was operated with a dormitory system for the geologists and workers in the area to stay. However, the group were given their own private room, probably due to the deference to their status as educated students. Whilst there, they spoke to the workers, and in particular befriended an older man called Ognev, who made quite an impression on George Krivonishenko. Ognev also made an impression on Luda, who was keeping her own private diary, apart from the group diary that everyone had access to, in which she gave a fuller description of Ognev. On arrival at the hostel, they cooked lunch and then rested. Films were available to watch in the hostel, and some of them watched a film while the others occupied themselves individually. Rustem played his mandolin while talking to Nikolai. Krivonishenko spent his time checking the equipment to make any necessary adjustments to the packing. Krivonishenko had made the diary entry describing their arrival at the hostel and how they spent their time on 26 January, but there is a single cryptic comment in the diary for that day made by Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, in which he states, "I can't, although I tried." There is no further detail and no later comment regarding this single-line entry, but Nikolai is thought to be possibly referring to have started smoking again, despite the solemn promise made by himself and the other males in the group that they would not smoke for the entire trip. The next day, 27 January, the diary entry described the weather as good. The wind was behind them, and they reached an agreement with the locals at the 41st Kvartal for a horse and a guide to take them to the next point on their journey, an abandoned settlement, which was approximately 15 miles or 24 kilometers further on. While waiting for the use of the horse, they helped a local by the name of Slava, described as Grandfather Slava, to unload hay from a carriage. Some of the boys rewrote a song, and then started singing with some of the locals and workers. One man in particular was described as singing beautifully. A number of forbidden songs were also sung, but these only by the workers, as the comment in the group diary was, "We heard," rather than any reference to any of the group singing the songs themselves or joining in. Nevertheless, they obviously knew that the songs were illegal, as they used the term illegal to describe them. It is possible they either joined in or sang some themselves, but would have made no written reference to having done so for fear of possible censure if anyone in authority read their diary on their return. A further comment was also made in the diary regarding these songs, as Article 58 Counter-Revolutionary Crimes. The group departed from the 41st Kvartal at 4 p.m. on 27 January. With this 15-mile or 24-kilometer section of the journey on foot made much easier by having the horse pull their packs and equipment on a cart. Before departing, they had bought loaves of soft, warm bread and ate 2 of them on the journey. The second Severny, or settlement they reached, was abandoned and derelict, but Ognev had told Igor Dyatlov where they could find a habitable dwelling to settle for the night to break their journey. It was sometime during this 5th day, 27 January, of their journey that Yuri Yudin's illness worsened. He had fallen ill on the truck traveling from Vijay to the 41st Kvartal, but had decided to tough it out and continue with the group as far as the second Severny, as he wanted to collect some geology samples and then return to Sverdlovsk. The pain in his leg was getting worse, and it had become apparent that he would be unable to meet the more physical demands of the rest of the journey in the mountains. He was diagnosed eventually with acute radiculitis. The second Severny, which as mentioned was now abandoned, had been a settlement used by Soviet geologists while they carried out research locally. Yuri Yudin was an economist, but had an interest in geology, and despite his illness, he obviously felt there was some value in continuing with the group in order to search out samples around the settlement to take back with him to the university. The horse pulling the group's backpacks and equipment moved slowly, yet the group was able to travel faster than if they had been carrying the stuff themselves. Despite complaints about the slowness of the horse, they covered 4 miles or 8 kilometers in 2 hours, reaching the river Ushma. By now, darkness was falling. Some members of the group had moved on ahead to reach the abandoned settlement before darkness fell completely. They wanted to find the house described to them by Ognev, as it was the only place suitable for rest for the night, as all the other buildings were in a bad state of disrepair, with a number of them literally falling apart. In the event, they managed to find the house described by Ognev in the complete darkness, out of the 25 houses in the settlement, and started a fire to keep warm. Several of them pierced their hands on old nails in the wood as they were gathering it for the fire. The horse and cart, with Yuri Yudin sitting on top in order to spare his leg pain, along with the remaining members of the group, eventually arrived at the abandoned settlement later that evening. Once they had settled in, they sat by the fire and talked and sang until 3 a.m. the following morning, 28 January, before going to sleep. The first 2 members of the group to awaken on 28 January were George Krivonishenko and Alexander Kolevatov, who then woke the others. The weather was good, with clear visibility. Although the temperature was -8 degrees Celsius, it was not excessively cold for the time of year and the area. After they had eaten breakfast, Luda made adjustments to the mountings on her skis, and Yuri Yudin went outside into the area near the settlement to see if he could find any minerals. There was nothing of any interest to him apart from pyrite and quartz veins in the immediate surrounding area. It must have been a relatively cursory search, as he was to leave the group that day and return to Sverdlovsk on account of his illness. He possibly felt too ill to search properly, but at least would be able to show on his return that he had made an effort despite being unwell. Again, this display of stoicism would have fitted in well with the ideal of the young communist, who is prepared to do what is expected of him or her, no matter what troubles may have to be faced. The first part of the diary entry for this day, 28 January, was made by Luda. who was obviously very fond of Yuriuden and sorry to see him go. Luda states that it was a pity, especially...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?